Hey, everybody. Welcome to This Machine Kills Fascist. My name is Dorian Wallace, he, him, and I am facilitating these panel discussions to talk about working through fascism. Today, there aren't any guests, so I'm just going to be giving a basic breakdown on understanding fascism. This is an article that I wrote for my Substack, which is doriansmode.substack.com. Well, here it goes. Understanding fascism, a basic breakdown and frameworks to help navigate authoritarianism. Fascism is fear of others disguised as patriotism, hunger for power cloaked in order, crushing the weak in the name of strength, controlling truth to destroy dissent. Fascism adapts, it feeds on desperation, and it always needs a scapegoat. Fascism hides behind edgy humor, promises of safety, and expands when the masses don't take it seriously. That's why studying it matters. That's why anti-fascist work matters. Keep learning, keep resisting, keep each other safe. I remember in 2015 when Donald Trump said, "When Mexico sends its people, they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists, and some, I assume, are good people." I thought, wow, that was racist as fuck. You're saying the government of Mexico sends over drugs, crime, and specifically rapists? What an insane thing to say. To put things into perspective, I grew up in conservative Ohio and identified as a conservative myself, though I was always open-minded when it came to meeting new people. By 2015, I was 6 years into my service with the Army National Guard. Over time, I began to realize I actually aligned with libertarian social values over traditional conservatism. And that said, I was used to being around conservative-leaning folks and rarely, if ever, experienced any major conflicts in my relationships. That changed over the first Republican debate in 2015. A relatively close friend of mine said, "Trump's the only one making any sense," and something shifted. I couldn't believe we had just watched the same debate. To me, Trump came off like a con artist, loud, cruel, full of garbage, full of nonsense. He made ridiculous promises like building a wall across the Mexican border, and he blamed immigrants for everything. And even though I didn't have a deep grasp of politics or economics at the time, I still felt that his comments were bullshit. I thought, that wall would cost a fortune. Are immigrants really the problem? That doesn't line up with any immigrant I know from real life. I realized I needed to start paying closer attention to this reactionary movement. People I knew were falling for this nonsense. In the months that followed, I watched people I knew, family members, fellow soldiers, hometown friends, begin to echo increasingly racist, reactionary, and conspiratorial beliefs. It felt like Rhinoceros or Cabaret, both of those plays, a slow drift toward fascism that suddenly accelerates. It was deeply unsettling to witness. These moments pushed me to seriously studying fascism, not only its politics and specific political movements, but its psychological, social, and cultural mechanics. I tracked far-right leaders like Richard Spencer and Nick Fuentes, joined anonymous online spaces like alt-right forums and Discord servers, and I tried to understand how this ideology recruits and radicalizes. Nearly a decade later, the crisis has deepened. Trump, Musk, and a terrifying class of tech oligarchs, Andreessen, Zuckerberg, Bezos, are consolidating power and hollowing out democratic institutions. America is experiencing fascism. We are here. This essay outlines helpful frameworks that, from various perspectives, that help us understand fascism, how it spreads, and how to fight it. So the first question is, what is fascism? Fascism is not a collection of ideas, symbols, or dictators. It is a social and political process with identifiable patterns of behavior and power consolidation. It is an authoritarian, reactionary, and chauvinist movement that mobilizes mass support through propaganda, nationalism, and the scapegoating of marginalized groups. Though it often uses populist rhetoric to present itself as revolutionary, fascism ultimately serves the interests of the powerful. Its core function is to concentrate and preserve power in the hands of a dominant few. Not all authoritarian regimes are fascist, but all fascist regimes are authoritarian, driven by chauvinism, reactionary politics, scapegoating, and a vision of total cultural and political control. Historian and political scientist Robert Paxton describes fascism as a gradual process, beginning with the spread of reactionary rhetoric and scapegoating, gaining vocal support and escalating into open repression and the radical exercise of power. He emphasizes that fascism is not dependent on a fixed doctrine, but on a set of mobilizing forces enacted in stages. Revolutionary theorist and political prisoner George Jackson argued that in the United States, fascism is expressed through state violence used to repress the poor and uphold capitalism. Systems of policing, incarceration, and surveillance are tools of fascist control used to protect capitalist interests by suppressing resistance among the oppressed. From 1619 to 1964, Black Americans were forced into systems of racialized authoritarian control, chattel slavery, ethno-nationalist terrorism, legalized sexual violence, and Jim Crow laws. Many Black radical thinkers accurately identify as fascists. Many Black Americans, particularly those in poverty, continue to face state repression through unaccountable police violence, mass incarceration, and systemic economic exclusion. Fascism is highly adaptable, taking different forms at different times and places, but its purpose is always the same: to enforce hierarchy and crush dissent. At its core is the belief in naturalized inequality, that some are destined to rule while others are meant to obey. This entitled sense of domination, masked as destiny or divine order, is social narcissism weaponized through the contemporary state structure. The 5 stages of fascism, Robert O. Paxton. Historian and scholar Robert Paxton argues that fascism is not a fixed ideology, but a political process that evolves through identifiable stages. In this model, fascism develops through 5 key phases. TLDR, fascism is a process, not a sudden event. It develops step by step, often with the cooperation of those who believe they can control or benefit from it. So intellectual exploration, reactionary and chauvinistic ideas circulate in intellectual, cultural, and political circles. These include anxieties about national decline, anti-immigrant sentiment, and attacks on democratic norms. An example, public figures begin directing outrage towards immigrants, feminists, or democracy itself for weakening the nation. Second step, rooting in politics. Fascist movements gain traction by mobilizing discontent, often with spectacle, propaganda, and cruelty. They attract a vocal base by presenting themselves as defenders of tradition, security, and order. Examples, paramilitary rallies, street violence, hate speech, and public intimidation. Step 3, legitimation by elites. Fascists gain support or tolerance from established institutions, business leaders, political parties, and media outlets who see them as useful tools. YouTube, for an example, YouTube media figures align with fascist movements to suppress oppressed groups by spreading misinformation. Fourth step, seizure of power. Fascists enter government, often through legal means like elections, appointments, and alliances, and erode democratic systems from within. Example, winning elections, then undermining democratic institutions through emergency powers or legal declarations. And finally, step 5, which is exercise and radicalization of power. Once in control, fascists escalate repression, attacking civil liberties, targeting marginalized groups, and deploying state violence. Examples: criminalizing protests, mass firings, normalizations of deportations and imprisonments with no due process. Another model that we can use to look at fascism is the 3 phases of fascism by George L. Jackson. So revolutionary theorist and political prisoner George L. Jackson argues in Blood in My Eye that fascism is an adaptive, evolving process embedded in US capitalism. He identifies 3 distinct phases that demonstrate how fascism adapts to changing conditions, often appearing differently across racial, gender, and class lines. TLDR, political prisoner George L. Jackson outlines how fascism in the US evolves through 3 phases, rising as a pseudo-revolutionary, violently repressing resistance once in power, and eventually securing control through co-optation and propaganda. So phase 1, this is fascism out of power. Fascist movements position themselves as revolutionary and subversive, often adapting anti-capitalist, anti-socialist rhetoric to appeal to widespread discontent. They exploit societal unrest to gain support, presenting themselves as champions of change. An example, white nationalists or other right-wing groups actively resisting Reconstruction and civil rights advancements. Phase 2, fascism in power but not secure. Once fascist elements ascend to power, they face instability and potential threats to their authority. The ruling class employs the state apparatus to suppress opposition, targeting vanguard parties, progressive movements, and marginalized communities through overt repression, censorship, and the curtailment of civil liberties. Example, the American prison system itself, as a mechanism of fascist control, is used to silence dissent and control the underclass. And finally, phase 3, this is fascism in power and secure. When fascist regimes have solidified their control, they may permit limited dissent to create an illusion of tolerance. The state's dominance is unchallenged, and any opposition is either co-opted or rendered ineffective. The regime maintains its power through propaganda, controlled opposition, and systemic indoctrination. The example here is the American state, having neutralized Black radical resistance, permits reformist voices. Sorry, my dog is being ridiculous. I'm going to read this example again. Example, the American state, having neutralized radical Black resistance, permits reformist voices who work within the system, advocating change through voting, policy tweaks, or integration into existing capitalist institutions. So in summary, in Blood of My Eye, George Jackson identifies fascism as a flexible and racialized process within US capitalism, progressing from insurgent populism to violent repression, and finally to stable domination that neutralizes revolutionary threats through tokenism and controlled opposition. Another model is Ur-Fascism, or eternal fascism, by Umberto Eco. Italian philosopher and novelist Umberto Eco wrote Ur-Fascism to describe how fascism can manifest in different societies. He lists common qualities that, while not always appearing together, form a dangerous constellation when many are present. So TLDR, fascism is a set of tendencies, not an ideology. If any of these traits appear in society, especially during times of fear or crisis, it is important to start paying attention for other tendencies. So here's the list of tendencies. Cult of tradition. idealizing a mythic past while rejecting modernity. Rejection of modernism, hostility towards reason, critical thought, and science. Action for action's sake, valuing violence and impulsive behavior over thoughtful deliberation. Disagreement is treason, branding critics as enemies of the nation. Fear of difference, racism, xenophobia, homophobia, transphobia, classism. Frustrated middle class, mobilizing downwardly mobile citizens against scapegoats. Obsession with conspiracy, the belief in secret plots by elites or minorities. Enemies are both strong and weak, depicting marginalized groups as both powerless and dangerous. Passivism is weakness, promoting aggression and war as virtues. Contempt for the weak, glorifying cruelty and domination. Machismo and gun obsession, celebrating masculine aggression and weapons. Hero worship, devotion to a strong man or mythic savior figure. Selective populism, claiming to speak for the real people while excluding others. And newspeak, reducing complex thought through simplistic emotional language. Another methodology is the three-way fight by Devin Zane Shaw. Philosopher and anti-fascist theorist Devin Zane Shaw developed the three-way fight model, rejecting the idea that fascism is simply the opposite of liberal democracy. This framework identifies three contending forces: neoliberal capitalism, or the state, which maintains the current exploitative status quo; fascist authoritarianism, or reactionary chauvinism, and this seeks a return to patriarchal, nationalist, or ethnically pure pass-through violence. And then the third social force is revolutionary socialism or autonomous social movements. And these groups fight for liberation, equality, and solidarity beyond the state or corporate power. Another model is understanding fascist behavior and practices. This is the Anti-Fascist Handbook by Mark Bray. So historian and activist Mark Bray emphasizes that fascism should be understood by its tactics and behaviors, not simply its ideology. His book, Antifa, the Anti-Fascist Handbook, identifies fascist patterns of behavior and trends. TLDR, fascism doesn't need philosophical consistency. It operates through fear, cruelty, and scapegoating to create instability to gain control. So factors are ultranationalism, the promoting of supremacy of one nation, culture, or ethnic group. There's ethno-racial supremacy, which is advocating for a racial or ethnic hierarchy. There is a concept of anti-egalitarianism, which is the rejection of social justice, equality, or pluralism. There is political violence, which is embracing violence as a political strategy. Anti-democracy, this is undermining democratic institutions and norms. Anti-feminism and anti-leftism, opposition to feminism, leftist movements, and liberation politics in general. And of course, strongman worship, which is the obsession with authoritarian leaders who promise to restore order. The Palingenic ultranationalism model by Roger Griffin. Historian Roger Griffin argues that fascist movements construct the narrative. The nation has lost its greatness due to outsiders, degenerates, or enemies within, and it must be reborn through radical action, purification, or violence. Fascism is seductive because it presents a counterfeit type of hope, a promise of national rebirth that requires exclusion, repression, and authoritarian control. So to break these words down, Palingenesis is a myth of national rebirth after a period of perceived decline. And combining this with ultra-nationalism, which is a belief in the inherent supremacy and purity of one's nation or culture. So an example, slogans like "Make some country great again" invokes this idea of national renewal by cleansing supposed threats. And finally, we're going to look at colonialism, when colonialism is fascism, and this is through the perspective of Frantz Fanon and Aimé Césaire. Psychiatrist Frantz Fanon argued that colonialism is fascism applied on a global scale. Colonization is a structure of domination where entire populations are subjected to systemic violence, psychological control, and cultural erasure. The colonial relationship is inherently fascist because it requires a totalizing regime that justifies dehumanization and terror in the name of civilization. Aimé Césaire, the poet and politician, sharpened this critique in his seminal text, Discourse on Colonialism, asserting that what was condemned as fascism under Hitler was actually colonialism brought back into the European continent. This insight demonstrates how fascist practices are not anomalies, but core features of building and maintaining an empire. So a way to think about it is colonialism equals exported fascism, and fascism equals imported colonialism. So fascism has always been a tool of colonial empires, which has shaped global systems of control. It extends across nation-state boundaries into the very psychological domination, meaning liberation is as much a psychological struggle as a political struggle. Colonized peoples are subjected through physical violence, economic exploitation, forced dependency, and the destruction of languages, traditions, and histories. The colonizer's power is enforced through military occupation, legal apartheid, and racial myths that portray the colonized as less than human. Fascism, in this transnational sense, is not only a domestic phenomenon, but imposed across borders, embedded in imperial logic, and deeply internalized by both oppressor and oppressed. Some examples: France and Algeria, there was torture, mass killings, and systemic racism framed as civilizing missions. Or Britain and Kenya, the brutal Maui Mau suppression, concentrations camps, and land dispossession. And of course, the United States and Puerto Rico and the Philippines, economic dependency, strategic militarization, suppression of self-determination, and racial hierarchies upheld through American exceptionalism. And I also didn't write in here, but forced sterilization was a huge thing that we did, especially in Puerto Rico, all the way up to the 80s. So yeah. Anyways, thank you all for listening. My name is Dorian Wallace. This is This Machine Kills Fascists. We're going to have more activists, more guests, more essays, just to talk about the nonsense that's going on in the planet right now. Peace be with you all. And fuck the system, fuck fascism, fuck the NYPD, fuck ICE, fuck Elon Musk, fuck Donald Trump. Solidarity forever. This machine kills fascism.